So in the previous video, we talked about homeostasis and how that implies that the body tends to be in a dynamic, steady state that it functions appropriately in. And it accomplishes that with a mechanism known as negative feedback. And negative feedback is the primary type of homeostatic control. And it maintains the stability by defending set points. And what that does is that any change that poses a detrimental risk to the body, well, it opposes it. And that's to keep the system within normal limits. In order to dissect what negative feedback is composed of, well, we get a response, and there's two outcomes to the response. The body tries to decrease it or eliminate it. Well, why would it want to do that? Well, the goal is to bring the settings back to normal. And we can describe how this works through three examples. When we have a deviation, of change in the body that can pose a risk, it becomes detected by a sensor. And that sensor will inform an integrator and the integrator will send the information about the detrimental change to an effector, which can be an organ. And the effector will ultimately bring a compensatory response. And the compensatory response will restore the settings back to normal. And it has a negative feedback on the sensor to tell the initial change or what's causing the change to become relieved. Let's look at another example that can highlight this in better depth. When there's a fall in room temperature, well, that becomes undesirable because the room gets too cold. So when the room gets too cold, it becomes detected by a thermometer. And the thermometer acts like the sensor in this situation. And it will send that information to a thermostat. And the thermostat will integrate this information and send it to the furnace. Because the whole point is to rewarm the room back to the original temperature since it's too cold. So when it reaches the furnace that's represented by an effector, what it will do is it will bring its own compensatory response, which is increase heat output. And the heat output will restore the room temperature back to normal, playing a negative feedback on the thermometer, which will ultimately relieve the change, which is the fall in temperature. It's like that way in the body as well. In the previous video, we talked about temperature and how it plays a homeostatic phenomenon in the body. Well, there's a set normal temperature that the body prefers to be in. And when there's a fall in body temperature, that can be dangerous. As we discussed, it can cause hypothermia. So what happens is that this fall in body temperature becomes detected. It becomes detected by temperature monitoring nerve cells. And this is represented as the sensor in this situation. And this nerve cell will inform the temperature control center of the brain, which is the hypothalamus, represented as the integrator in this situation. And then the temperature control center will send the information, for example, to skeletal muscles in one situation. And the whole point is to bring about a response to change the body temperature back to its normal setting, since there's a fall in it. So the skeletal muscle will bring about heat production through shivering. And when we shiver, we generate heat. And the heat will act as a compensatory response to restore body temperature. And when the body temperature becomes restored, it plays a negative feedback on to what caused the change to even first take place. So let's recap here. We discussed homeostasis and we described it as being the dynamic steady state in which the body prefers to be in. And one mechanism as to how that steady state is reached is through what's known as negative feedback. And the main purpose of it is to respond to changes that can be detrimental to the body. And those changes will respond by either decreasing or eliminating the stimulus that brings about the harm in the body. And this is to establish equilibrium of the body. And this is why it's a mechanism that opposes changes in order to bring about a balanced system in the body. And the next video will look at positive feedback and how it's also a homeostatic relationship that is necessary for the body to be in.